The harder you force life to happen, the heavier everything becomes, because some of the biggest breakthroughs only appear when your mind finally stops fighting itself. There comes a point in life where you become exhausted, not because you are doing nothing, but because you are trying too hard to control everything. You are forcing outcomes, forcing timing, forcing people to understand you, forcing yourself to always stay motivated, always stay positive, always stay ahead. And slowly, without realizing it, your entire life starts feeling heavy. Because the more you force life, the more resistance you begin to feel. At first, forcing feels productive. It feels like effort. It feels like ambition. You tell yourself that if you push harder, think harder, worry harder, and control every detail, things will finally work out. But over time, that pressure starts damaging your inner peace. Your mind becomes restless. Your emotions become unstable. Your thoughts never fully relax. And even when nothing is happening externally, internally you feel tension all the time. That is the strange thing about forcing life. It creates resistance inside you before it creates results outside you. Because when your entire energy is built on control, your mind never truly rests. You become obsessed with outcomes, obsessed with timing, obsessed with whether things are happening fast enough. And instead of flowing through life with clarity, you begin fighting every moment mentally. You start overthinking everything. You analyze every delay. You question every setback. You become emotionally attached to every result. And eventually, you stop living in the present because your mind is constantly trying to force the future into existence. But life does not respond well to desperation, because desperation creates tension, and tension disconnects you from awareness. When you are forcing everything, you stop listening to yourself clearly. You stop paying attention to timing, intuition, emotional balance, and inner clarity. Your entire focus becomes control, and control is exhausting. That is why many people work hard but still feel emotionally drained all the time. It is not always the effort itself that destroys them. It is the pressure behind the effort, the fear, the urgency, the emotional attachment to outcomes. That is what creates resistance internally. You may even notice this pattern in simple moments. The harder you force yourself to stop thinking about something, the more your mind thinks about it. The harder you try to force peace, the more restless you become. The harder you chase certain outcomes emotionally, the more distant they seem to feel. Because forcing creates inner conflict. Part of you is trying to move naturally, but another part is constantly applying pressure. And over time, this pressure disconnects you from the present moment completely. You stop appreciating small progress. You stop trusting timing. You stop allowing life to unfold naturally. Everything becomes a struggle in your mind. And this is where resistance grows strongest. Because life becomes difficult not only because of external problems, but because internally you are fighting reality every moment. You are mentally arguing with where you are instead of responding to it clearly. You want things faster. You want certainty immediately. You want answers before the process is complete. And when life does not move according to your emotional expectations, frustration appears. But here is what awakening eventually teaches you. Forcing is not the same as flowing with purpose. Real strength is not panic-driven control. Real strength is calm consistency. It is being able to act without emotional desperation. It is being able to work without mentally collapsing. It is being able to pursue goals without losing inner peace in the process. Because when your mind is calm, your awareness becomes sharper. You think more clearly. You make better decisions. You stop wasting energy fighting things you cannot immediately control. And slowly, you realize something powerful. The resistance you kept feeling was not always life blocking you. Sometimes it was the pressure you were creating inside yourself. The constant fear, the constant overthinking, the constant need to force timing. And once you finally begin releasing that internal pressure, something changes. Your mind becomes quieter. Your emotions become steadier. Your actions become more focused. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you stopped fighting every moment mentally. And that is when things begin working differently, not through desperation, not through emotional force, but through alignment. patience, awareness, and steady action. Because the moment you stop trying to force life to move according to your fear is the moment life finally begins responding to the calmer, clearer, and more powerful version of who you truly are. One of the biggest illusions the mind creates is this. It convinces you that control means progress. It tells you that if you keep pushing harder, thinking harder, worrying harder, and forcing every detail, you are moving forward. But many times what feels like progress is actually pressure, and pressure is not the same as growth. Because when your mind becomes obsessed with control, it slowly disconnects you from clarity. You begin living in constant tension, constantly trying to force outcomes instead of understanding the process. And this happens so subtly that most people never notice it. They believe stress means ambition. They believe overthinking means responsibility. They believe emotional exhaustion means they are trying hard enough. But often the mind is simply trapped in survival mode, confusing control with movement. You see this especially when people become emotionally attached to results. They start believing that if they relax mentally, everything will fall apart. So they keep forcing themselves to think about problems non-stop, as if constant mental pressure will somehow create solutions. But instead of clarity, the opposite happens. The mind becomes noisy. Focus becomes weaker. Decisions become emotional instead of intelligent. Because a stressed mind does not see clearly. It reacts. And when your mind is constantly reacting, you lose connection with the present moment completely. Your attention becomes trapped in imagined futures, fears, and worst-case scenarios. You start believing that controlling every detail will protect you from uncertainty. But uncertainty is part of life. No amount of overthinking can remove it completely. And this is where the mind creates suffering for itself. Because instead of responding to life calmly, it begins fighting reality. Internally, it wants guarantees before action. It wants certainty before movement. It wants immediate results before patience has even had time to work. And this creates emotional chaos. You begin checking constantly for signs that things are working. You begin measuring your progress obsessively. You begin tying your emotional state to external outcomes, and slowly, your peace disappears. Not because life is impossible, but because your mind is trying to force certainty out of an uncertain world. That is why forcing things often leads to burnout. Because you are not only carrying effort, you are carrying emotional pressure attached to the effort. Every action becomes heavy because your identity becomes connected to whether the result happens fast enough. And when results delay, panic appears. You begin doubting yourself. You begin questioning everything. You begin pushing even harder emotionally. But the harder you force mentally, the more disconnected you become from natural flow and awareness. This is why some people spend years working hard but still feel internally lost. Their energy is not grounded in alignment. It is grounded in fear, urgency, and control. And fear cannot create peace, because fear always wants more control, more certainty, more reassurance. But life does not fully operate that way. Sometimes progress is invisible before it becomes visible. Sometimes growth is happening internally before results appear externally. Sometimes timing matters more than force. And when you do not understand this, you begin attacking yourself emotionally every time life moves slowly. But real progress feels different. Real progress still requires discipline and effort, but it no longer feels emotionally desperate. You act with focus instead of panic. You work with consistency instead of obsession. You stop treating every delay like a personal failure, and this shift changes everything internally. Because once you stop confusing control with progress, your mind begins relaxing. You stop needing to force every outcome emotionally. You stop wasting energy trying to predict every possible future. Instead, you begin focusing on what is actually within your control. Your actions, your mindset, your consistency, your awareness. And when your attention returns to these things, clarity returns with it. Suddenly, your decisions become calmer. Your focus becomes sharper, Your emotions become less dependent on immediate results. And for the first time, you begin understanding that forcing was never creating true progress. It was only creating inner pressure. Because progress is not built through panic. It is built through aligned action repeated consistently over time. And the moment you stop trying to control every outcome and start trusting disciplined, steady movement instead, is the moment your energy finally stops fighting itself and starts moving in the direction your life was always meant to grow. Real growth begins the moment you stop acting from desperation and start acting from alignment. Because desperation and alignment may look similar from the outside, but internally they are completely different energies. Desperation feels heavy. Alignment feels clear. Desperation chases outcomes emotionally. Alignment focuses on direction calmly. And most people spend years trying to force results without realizing that the energy behind their actions is actually pushing peace further away. When you operate from desperation, every decision becomes emotionally loaded. You are not simply working toward something. You are mentally attached to needing it immediately. Your happiness depends on it. Your confidence depends on it. Your emotional state rises and falls based on whether you are getting signs, progress, or validation fast enough, and that pressure slowly destroys your clarity. Because a desperate mind cannot fully listen to itself, it becomes reactive. It becomes impatient. It begins making emotional decisions instead of intelligent ones. You start rushing things. You start doubting yourself constantly. You start forcing situations that are not naturally aligned. And even when you achieve small progress, it never feels enough because your mind remains trapped in urgency. That is why desperation exhausts people so deeply. Not because they are moving forward, but because internally they are fighting reality every step of the way. But alignment feels different. Alignment does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean sitting back and waiting for life magically to change. Alignment still requires action, discipline, patience, and effort. But the difference is that your actions are no longer driven by fear. They are driven by clarity. You begin moving because it feels right, not because panic is controlling you. You stop trying to prove your worth through constant pressure. You stop treating every delay as a sign that you are failing. And slowly, your relationship with progress changes. You begin understanding that forcing timing often blocks natural growth, because some things develop properly only when your mind stops interfering with them emotionally. Think about how many times in life clarity came when you finally relaxed mentally. How many answers appeared after you stopped obsessing? How many situations improved once you released emotional pressure from them? That is not coincidence. Because when your mind calms down, your awareness becomes stronger. You begin seeing opportunities, patterns and solutions that stress was hiding from you before. And this is where real growth begins, not through panic, but through internal alignment. Alignment means your thoughts, actions, and energy start moving in the same direction. You say less and do more. You force less and trust the process more. You stop needing constant reassurance because your focus shifts toward steady movement instead of immediate results. And this creates emotional stability. Because now your identity is no longer fully attached to outcomes. You begin understanding that growth is a process, not a race against time. That realization changes everything internally. You stop waking up every day feeling mentally at war with life. You stop feeling like every moment must produce visible results immediately. You stop punishing yourself emotionally for being human, for growing slowly, or for not having everything figured out yet. Instead, you begin building consistency quietly. And consistency built from alignment becomes powerful because it is sustainable. Desperation burns energy quickly. Alignment preserves it. Desperation creates emotional highs and crashes. Alignment creates steady momentum. And over time, steady momentum always becomes stronger than emotional force. This is why some people suddenly seem to glow differently after they stop forcing life. Their energy changes. Their presence changes. Their decisions become calmer because they are no longer operating from internal chaos. They are operating from trust. Not blind trust that everything will magically happen, but trust that calm, focused action repeated consistently is enough, and once you reach this stage, something powerful happens. You stop chasing life with panic. You start walking through it with awareness. You stop trying to control every outcome emotionally. You start focusing on becoming emotionally stable regardless of temporary results, and, strangely, that is often when things finally begin flowing more naturally, because your energy is no longer resisting itself. And the moment your actions stop coming from fear and start coming from alignment is the moment life begins responding, not to your desperation, but to the calmer, clearer, and more powerful version of who you were becoming all along. One of the most misunderstood things in life is letting go. Most people hear the words "let go" and immediately think it means giving up. They think it means becoming weak, losing ambition, or accepting defeat. But true letting go has nothing to do with quitting. In reality, letting go is releasing the unhealthy emotional grip you have on outcomes that are controlling your peace. Because there is a difference between working towards something and emotionally clinging to it. When you cling to outcomes, your mind becomes trapped in tension. You stop acting freely. You stop thinking clearly. Every delay feels personal. Every obstacle feels threatening. And instead of moving through life with awareness, you begin reacting from fear. That is why attachment creates suffering. Not because goals are wrong. Not because ambition is wrong, but because emotional dependence on specific outcomes creates inner pressure that slowly consumes your peace. You start believing that you can only feel calm once everything happens exactly the way you want. Until then, your mind stays restless. And this is how people accidentally turn their goals into emotional prisons. They cannot relax because they are terrified of uncertainty. They cannot enjoy the present because their happiness is trapped somewhere in the future. They constantly replay scenarios in their head, trying to control what has not happened yet. And the more they try to control life emotionally, the more exhausted they become, because life does not fully obey emotional force. Some things require patience, some things require timing, some things unfold naturally only after you stop gripping them with fear. But when you are emotionally attached, patience feels impossible. Your mind keeps demanding immediate certainty. It keeps asking, what if it never happens? What if I lose this? What if things do not work out? And these thoughts create anxiety because your peace becomes dependent on outcomes you cannot completely control. This is why letting go becomes powerful. Because letting go is not saying, I do not care anymore. It is saying, I will continue, moving forward without destroying my peace, trying to force certainty. That is emotional maturity. You still care. You still work hard. You still pursue what matters to you. But you stop mentally collapsing every time life moves slower than your expectations. And once you begin understanding this, something shifts inside you. You stop attaching your identity to results. You stop measuring your worth based on temporary outcomes. You stop acting from panic and start acting from awareness. And suddenly, your mind becomes calmer. Not because every problem disappears, but because you are no longer emotionally fighting reality every second. You begin understanding that some things cannot be forced into existence through fear. In fact, fear often clouds your ability to respond wisely. Because when the mind is attached emotionally, it loses perspective. You begin overreacting to delays. You begin misreading situations. You begin making impulsive decisions just to escape uncertainty. And many times, that desperation pushes you further away from what you were trying to achieve in the first place. But when you let go emotionally, clarity returns. You begin seeing situations more honestly. You begin responding instead of reacting. You begin focusing on what you can actually control instead of obsessing over everything you cannot. And this changes your energy completely. You no longer wake up every day mentally chasing certainty. You stop exhausting yourself trying to predict every outcome. You stop carrying the emotional weight of needing everything to happen immediately. Instead, you become more present, more patient, more focused, more grounded. And strangely, this is often when things start flowing more naturally, because your mind is no longer blocked by fear-based attachment. Your decisions become cleaner. Your actions become calmer. Your energy stops pushing against itself internally. And that calmness creates strength, not passive strength, not lazy acceptance, but clear, emotionally balanced strength. The kind of strength that keeps moving without panic. The kind of strength that trusts the process without losing discipline. The kind of strength that understands peace is not found through controlling every outcome, but through learning how to stay centered while outcomes unfold. And eventually you realize something life-changing. Letting go was never about losing your desire for something. It was about losing the fear that you are nothing without it. And the moment you stop gripping life with desperation and start moving with trust, awareness, and emotional freedom, is the moment life finally begins flowing through you instead of constantly feeling like something you must fight to control. Most people believe their best decisions are made under pressure. They think panic creates urgency, urgency creates action, and action creates success. But if you observe life carefully, you begin realizing something completely different. Pressure rarely creates clarity. It creates reaction, and reaction is not the same as intelligence. Because when your mind is overwhelmed by panic, fear, emotional chaos, or desperation, your thinking becomes distorted. You stop seeing situations clearly. You stop responding wisely. Instead, you begin acting emotionally just to escape discomfort as quickly as possible. And this is why so many people create bigger problems while trying to solve smaller ones. They make decisions from fear instead of awareness. Under pressure, the mind wants immediate relief. It wants certainty instantly. It wants to remove discomfort right away. And because of that, it often sacrifices long-term peace for short-term emotional escape. You see this everywhere in life. People rush into relationships because they fear loneliness. People abandon their goals because they fear temporary failure. People make impulsive choices because uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. And afterward, once emotions calm down, they realize they were never truly thinking clearly in the first place. Because pressure narrows awareness. When your mind enters survival mode, your focus becomes emotional instead of intelligent. You stop seeing the full picture. Your decisions become driven by urgency, insecurity, and fear of losing control. And this creates internal chaos. You begin overthinking everything. You become emotionally reactive to small situations. You struggle to separate real problems from imagined fears. And slowly, your peace disappears. Not because life became impossible, but because your nervous system is constantly operating under pressure. That is why peace is so powerful. Peace is not weakness. Peace is mental clarity. When your mind becomes calm, you begin thinking differently. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. Your awareness expands because fear is no longer blocking your ability to see clearly. And suddenly, situations that once felt overwhelming begin making more sense. You notice patterns you missed before. You recognize emotional triggers faster. You become more patient before making decisions, because a peaceful mind has access to perspective that a pressured mind cannot reach. This is why emotionally balanced people often seem stronger during difficult situations. It is not because they have no emotions. It is because they do not allow emotions to completely hijack their awareness. They pause before reacting. They observe before speaking. They think before deciding. And that pause changes everything. Because many of the worst decisions in life happen in moments of emotional intensity. Moments where people are desperate to escape discomfort. Moments where fear becomes louder than wisdom. But peace creates space between emotion and action. And inside that space, intelligence returns. You stop needing to force answers immediately. You stop making decisions only to reduce temporary anxiety. You stop treating every uncertain moment like an emergency. Instead, you begin responding with clarity. And clarity creates better outcomes than panic ever could. Because panic focuses on survival. Peace focuses on understanding. Panic reacts emotionally. Peace responds intentionally, and over time, this changes the entire direction of your life. You become more stable emotionally. more focused mentally, more disciplined in your actions. Not because life becomes easier, but because your inner state becomes stronger. And once you experience this shift, you begin realizing something important. Most of your suffering was not caused by life itself, but by the pressure your mind created while trying to control life emotionally. The constant urgency, the constant fear of outcomes, the constant need for immediate certainty. That pressure drained your clarity, but peace restores it. And this is why some of the most powerful breakthroughs happen only after people stop forcing everything mentally. Once the noise calms down, awareness finally has space to operate. And suddenly, life no longer feels like a constant emergency. You begin trusting yourself more. You begin thinking long-term instead of emotionally. You begin acting with patience instead of panic. And that is when your decisions become powerful, because the best decisions are rarely born from chaos. They are born from a calm mind that can see clearly even when life feels uncertain. And the moment you stop allowing pressure to control your thinking and start protecting your inner peace instead, is the moment your mind finally becomes clear, enough to create the life you were too overwhelmed to see before. The biggest battle most people fight is not with life itself, it is with themselves. They are constantly resisting their emotions, resisting their timing, resisting their current reality, resisting the process they are going through. And because of that resistance, even small situations begin feeling emotionally heavy. They want life to move faster. They want certainty immediately. They want themselves to already be healed, successful, disciplined, and confident. And when reality does not match those expectations fast enough, frustration appears. But what most people do not realize is this: the more you fight yourself internally, the more exhausted you become externally. Because inner conflict drains energy faster than almost anything else. You see it in the way people speak to themselves. They constantly pressure themselves for not being far enough ahead. They criticize themselves for still struggling. They become angry at their emotions instead of understanding them. And slowly, life turns into an internal war. A war against fear. A war against uncertainty. A war against the present moment. But healing, growth, and transformation cannot fully happen in constant self-conflict, because the mind becomes trapped between force and resistance. One part of you wants peace. Another part keeps creating pressure. One part wants growth. Another part keeps punishing you for growing slowly, and this creates emotional exhaustion. That is why life starts changing only when you stop fighting yourself. Not when you become passive, not when you stop caring, but when you stop treating yourself like an enemy every time life feels uncertain. Because awareness changes the way you experience struggle. Instead of constantly asking, "Why am I not there yet?" you begin asking, "What is this stage teaching me?" That shift changes everything. You stop seeing delays as proof of failure. You stop seeing emotions as weaknesses. You stop seeing uncertainty as something that must immediately be eliminated. And suddenly, your relationship with life becomes calmer. You begin understanding that growth is not always fast. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is invisible. Sometimes the biggest transformations are happening internally, long before results appear externally. But when you constantly fight your current reality emotionally, you block yourself from learning what this stage is trying to teach you. Because resistance clouds awareness. The more you mentally reject where you are, the harder it becomes to move through it wisely. Your mind becomes obsessed with escape instead of understanding. And this creates suffering. You begin forcing timelines, forcing emotions, forcing healing, forcing answers. But life does not always unfold according to emotional urgency. Some lessons require patience. Some transformations require time. Some answers appear only after the mind becomes quiet enough to receive them. And this is where surrender becomes powerful. Not surrender in the sense of giving up on your future, but surrendering your constant internal battle against the process. Because once you stop fighting every moment mentally, your energy changes completely. You become more patient with yourself, more understanding toward your emotions, more aware of your patterns without hating yourself for having them. And that self-awareness creates peace. Not perfect peace, but grounded peace. The kind of peace that allows you to continue moving forward without emotionally collapsing every time life becomes difficult. And strangely, this is often when breakthroughs begin happening. Because your mind is no longer wasting energy resisting reality. Your attention returns to what actually matters: your growth, your actions, your awareness, your direction. You stop trying to force yourself into becoming someone overnight. Instead, you begin trusting small, consistent steps, and slowly, your life begins changing naturally. Your reactions become calmer. Your decisions become clearer. Your energy becomes lighter. Not because problems disappear, but because you are no longer carrying the additional weight of fighting yourself constantly. And eventually, you realize something powerful. Life was never asking you to become perfect immediately. It was asking you to stay present enough to grow through each stage consciously. That realization removes so much pressure, because now you stop trying to control everything emotionally. You stop needing every moment to make sense instantly. You stop treating temporary struggles like permanent failure. Instead, you begin moving with patience, awareness, and trust. And that is when life finally starts flowing differently. Because the moment you stop fighting your emotions, your timing, your journey, and your current reality is the moment your energy stops working against itself and finally begins moving in harmony with the life you were always meant to grow into. The moment you stop forcing every outcome, every emotion, and every stage of your journey is the moment life finally begins flowing through you instead of constantly feeling like something you must survive.